In a previous video, we covered some of the lesser discussed anime associated with Toonami. Some of the anime was as short-lived as their Toonami run, while others had healthy airtime outside of Toonami. Now though, we want to cover the other side of that coin. We want to look at the anime that's heavily associated with Toonami, that had a strong run in one way or another that made it synonymous with the block. When you hear the names of these anime, you automatically think, oh yeah, I used to watch that on Toonami. Or when you hear Toonami, they're some of the first anime that you think of. Their popularity may vary. Some of these anime may still be iconic today outside of Toonami, or they were at the right place at the right time and are obscure now. For the most part, we'll be looking at the weekday block since that's when Toonami was at its peak, but other blocks like the Midnight Run, the Saturday lineup, or the Adult Swim revival are all fair game. We'll also be excluding any anime that was exclusive to Adult Swim's anime lineup from the 2000s when they were doing their own thing. That's a topic for its own video someday. And joining me is Toonami's 8th greatest fan, Judgment Meter.
Hi everybody! I like anime, and I grew up on Toonami because that's all I had. I had no friends who would watch anime with me. Feel bad for me.
Now, let's document the top 10 iconic Toonami anime. Number 10, Cyborg 009. The number 10 spot was the hardest one to pick, since there were a lot of borderline anime that had a nice little Toonami run, but weren't as connected to the block as some of the longer run shows. We could have put Zoid's New Century here, maybe Card Captors, perhaps Hamtaro for the troll pick, but it was between two robot-themed anime for this spot in the end, Transformers Armada or Cyborg 009. Now I watched so much Transformers Armada as a kid. There was a lot I liked. There was tension on who could get the most mini-cons, Starscream changed alliances for a period of time, and I liked all the new character designs. Tidal Wave was a huge guy, Sideways created a little guy to ride on himself, and Jetstream was hype when he came out of nowhere. I could go on. However, I'll give this entry to Cyborg 009, since we said in the other Toonami video we would give it an entry, so there's the tiebreaker. Cyborg 009 is a pretty iconic series in Japan. The manga started in the 60s, so it retains that classic round character design. Due to its notoriety, it's had plenty of movies and series over the years, so the Cyborg 009 we knew on Toonami was one of many, with its full name being Cyborg 009, the Cyborg Soldier, to differentiate it from the other adaptations. This series, though, closely followed the original manga, so it's one of the best ways to consume the series. The show was emotionally heavy. You have the action promised in the commercials, with each cyborg having a specialty power to take on other robotic enemies, but it involved a group of kidnapped humans who were experimented on by an evil organization to be turned into cyborg weapons, and now they're banding together to escape their captors. Each episode generally has them encounter a new enemy or trap from the organization, but between all that, you learn about the human side of these characters and why their situation is so tragic.
Yeah, I don't remember specific episodes, just that they were all dressed the same and they had those rockin' scarves. I'm like, oh man, I want an ascot like that. It was like they were in a boy band, but with weapons and suffering. And there was a little baby who was actually an old man.
Despite having a reasonable amount of episodes, around 50, Toonami only aired about half of them, essentially being the first season of the series, which premiered on Toonami at the end of June 2003. The first season aired twice, and then it was replaced by Transformers Armada on the block for its second rerun cycle, meaning both series I considered for this spot had exactly 2 runs on Toonami weekdays. They were probably testing the waters to see how Cyborg 009 would take, but ratings were apparently mediocre on Toonami, so they just opted to banish the series to other places on Cartoon Network. Reruns of Season 1 got put on the Saturday Video Entertainment System block in 2004, which was a Saturday evening action cartoon block that we covered more in the other Toonami video. Basically, it was like Toonami, but not officially Toonami, and had a retro video game theme to its bumpers. Not sure what the ratings looked like over there, but in 2004, when a new Saturday night Toonami block replaced the Entertainment System block, the network just chose to show the remaining unaired Cyborg 009 episodes between Friday and Saturday night at 1:30 a.m., after the Fridays block with all the new episodes of Cartoon Network originals. And as referenced, there was a longer Saturday night Toonami block block now after the network axed the weekday lineup, so they could have easily added Cyborg 009 to that lineup. They just chose not to. So in the end, the network aired all the episodes of Cyborg 009, but only half on Toonami. However, the combination of the advertising and the series coming on when Toonami was still a strong weekday block made it stick out to me, and while the weekly 1:30 a.m. airing for the second season was not the ideal time slot, it wasn't the worst fate. You might still have older kids or teens up late Friday night that will tune in for those dot-hack Cyborg 009 back-to-back episodes at 1 a.m. It's a better fate than some other former Toonami shows got for late-night airings, but we'll get to that in another entry. Number 9. Ronin Warriors. Toonami was all about their cartoons from the 80s and earlier when they premiered in 1997, anime included. It all started with Voltron being the first anime shown on the block between random Hanna-Barbera action, and it evolved into showing more 90s anime like Sailor Moon, along with other 90s cartoons in general like Reboot. As the block transitioned from being a catalog of older cartoons into more recent shows, Ronin Warriors felt like a product of the older Toonami model when the block was becoming more modern, being a late 80s action anime with robotic aspects premiering on the block in September 1999. But unlike the other 80s anime on Toonami that seemed like they didn't get too much special promotion, Ronin Warriors felt like it got a lot more attention in advertising and time slots, in part because it was on Toonami after it gained a lot of popularity in the 2 years since its premiere. Toonami's ad announcer, Peter Cullen, voice of Optimus Prime, and many others, just had a way to make any shows sound epic in the commercials. Ronin Warriors was also a more recent dub, making it feel newer. Most other 80s anime they showed on Toonami, like G-Force or Robotech, were older dubs, but Ronin Warriors was dubbed in 1995, only 4 years before its Toonami debut, and it was done by Ocean Productions, so the voices were recognizable from other anime on Toonami at the time, like the first Dragon Ball Z dub. The show felt like it was on all the time, mostly because Toonami put it on every block possible. Besides being a part of the normal weekday lineup, they also put it on their late night block, the Midnight Run, when that was on Saturdays, and it was on their somewhat short-lived morning block on weekends, Rising Sun, so they gave us plenty of opportunities to catch Ronin Warriors, and what's not to love? It's some old-fashioned anime action. Futuristic warriors can summon samurai robot powers to take down evil forces. You know, it's fun.
This looks like Knights of the Zodiac.
Kind of, but not really.
Yeah, I don't know what the show's about.
It had 2 seasons worth of episodes, so it was new on Toonami for a few months before it became common on the rerun cycle until they took it off completely in late 2001. Even though its run was standard for a Toonami show, something about this anime felt iconic, and it's generally one of the first anime I think of when I hear 80s action anime, despite being a lot shorter than other 80s classics. I think we can thank Toonami's heavy promotion of the series for that. Number 8. Zatch Bell. With Toonami initially being an afternoon weekday block since its inception in 1997, it was hard to think of it leaving that time slot. However, in March 2004, Toonami was taken off weekdays for good and turned into a Saturday night block from 7 to 11 p.m. It was replaced with Maguzi, which was just Toonami but different. It had a bunch of aquatic alien creatures presenting the shows, which had enough action and anime inspiration where they could have been Toonami shows if the executives didn't want to change the weekday branding. Shows like Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, Totally Spies, and Code Lyoko were all Maguzi shows that could have vibed on Toonami. Still, Maguzi had a fun charm to it. Anyway, Saturday night was Toonami's new home for about 4 years, starting in 2004, and at the beginning, the new block didn't quite have its identity. Saturday Toonami was initially a mix of new shows that had minor success like Duel Masters, reruns of action cartoons that the network had the rights to like Jackie Chan Adventures, and shows that never finished their run from the weekdays like Yu Yu Hakusho and Dragon Ball GT. However, about a year into the Saturday schedule, the block got 4 anime that I feel really gave this version of Toonami its own identity separate from the weekday lineup. They were the 4 horsemen of Saturday Toonami. You had Zatch Bell, Naruto, One Piece, and Bobobo Bobobo. My take that I know is probably not the right one is Zatch Bell felt like the most Toonami associated of the bunch in hindsight. Don't get me wrong, Naruto was the most popular, getting multiple time slots and extra reruns to make sure no one missed it, and One Piece was a big name that was botched by a heavily edited dub at the time, along with Toonami having to share it with Foxbox, but I think the fact that both those anime were able to exist outside Toonami in the age of fan subs and streaming don't make me only associate them with Toonami as much as Zatch Bell and Bobobo do. I feel like both those anime solely have any popularity in the US today because of Toonami. I give Zatch Bell the edge too, since it was the first of these anime to show up on Toonami, debuting on the block in March 2005 and lasting there for about 2 years, and it was resilient for how it stayed around despite its hiatuses. The series got a prime 9:30 time slot and happily got to air uninterrupted for about 50 episodes, except by a movie or a marathon night. Once we got to early 2006, that's when its airings started to get shaky. First, there were random time slot changes, mostly bouncing around between 8 and 9:30, which was still prime time, so it might have not hurt it. Then it either wasn't aired at all, or got some late 10:30 time slots in March when they were showing Miyazaki movies weekly for a month. Then when that themed month was over, Zatch Bell was weirdly gone by April 2006. There were just assorted shows and movies taking its spot, so I thought I saw the writing on the wall, and this was going to be another show dropped with no announcement. But to my delight, it was back by the end of May 2006, and it got to air its second season up to a point. I don't know if it was going to be cancelled and someone stopped them, or if they just wanted to make it seem like a mid-season break. We got to see the introduction of the antagonist of Season 2, and all seemed fine with Zatch Bell, going between its 8 and 9:30 time slots throughout the season, but by January 2007, the series was taken off with no explanation. Episode 77 was the last we saw when the antagonist was still being fought. They could have at least waited until the last 10 episodes of the season when it was all filler side plots, and Zatch Bell was thus never seen on the network again. It was probably a lack of ratings, but it was disappointing. It even got a rerun cycle on Magoozy in mid-2006, so I thought it was doing well. The series was only dubbed up to episode 104 of the full 150, so it was going to be cut off before it ended regardless. Kind of weird how they just dubbed the first 4 episodes of season 3, and then they were like, you know what, we're done. Canada at least aired up to episode 104 on their own block, but the series didn't quite have the steam to keep going in the West. It was a shame, since it had the perfect vibe of being Pokemon and Digimon, but with selected humans getting friendly and or evil demon children from another planet instead of animals. They were constantly unlocking new powers, and some of these fighting styles got weird. It was right down my alley.
I didn't watch it when it was on its run on Toonami, but I remember seeing the commercials. But watching it with MrTopTenList, I actually enjoyed it. I liked the cute little monstrous killer babies.
Momotos.
What?
They were called Momotos.
Momotos. Thank you. They were cute enough and not creepy to keep my interest.
It's a shame Zatch Bell petered out, but I'm glad they showed us as much as they did. If anything, I should do a top 10 Zatch Bell villains list someday to show off how creative and unique these villains got. Number 7, Yu Yu Hakusho. Yu Yu Hakusho started off on Adult Swim when it was broadcast in the US, but it eventually became a Toonami show where it found a bigger audience and got more airtime. Adult Swim showed it on their Saturday night action block starting in February 2002, but for some reason they only showed the first season up until the end of the Saint Beast arc, and then just reran that part of the first season for about a year before moving it to Toonami at the end of February 2003, where the series got started from the beginning but went past the part where Adult Swim stopped. I'm not sure why Adult Swim didn't keep the series going, but having missed out on the Adult Swim run of Yu Yu Hakusho, I was instantly hooked when I caught it on Toonami. I still enjoyed the cutesy slice-of-life feeling of the first 5 episodes, but since they were aired daily on Toonami, that part of the series went by fast for the kids who wanted to get right to the action, when the main character Yusuke becomes a spirit detective investigating the invading demons. Then we got all the big fights and a lead-in to the most popular part of the series, the Dark Tournament, and it was a hit because it was a tournament arc. We were in a post-Dragon Ball society for organized anime fights, so it makes sense why they would want to give this series a bigger weekday time slot when all the Dragon Ball kids were paying attention.
I like the progression of the show, like how the show starts with Yusuke just dying, and then he has to work his way through the tournament, and then the next tournament.
Though they had to edit out a lot with this series. Of course there was blood, but some scenes had pretty graphic violence with things like people being decapitated or bones breaking, so I definitely see why they opted for Adult Swim initially. There's also a lot of crass humor they also felt they had to redub, which makes me wonder, is the Toonami edit available anywhere for the sake of history? Obviously, the uncensored dub is king, but I can't check to see how they censored all the jokes outside of the occasional archived anime forum from 2003. Perhaps the Toonami edit of Yu Yu Hakusho is lost media now, or maybe it's just media that we don't pay attention to since there's no reason to seek it out when we have the uncensored dub readily available. Anyway, the weekday airings were going great for a while, until they got to the finals of the Dark Tournament. At the episode right when the protagonists were about to fight the main villain's team Toguro, they would cut us off and restart the series up until that point again, and then rerun it all over again. Toonami would do this with some longer series to save episodes, but it was such a letdown as a kid. I don't see why they couldn't just run the series in full on weekdays, or at least finish off the season before cutting us off. And that ultimately ended up being the end of Yu Yu Hakusho on weekdays. I guess they were saving the rest of the episodes for their big move to being a Saturday block. Once Toonami ended as a weekday block and was just a big block of shows on Saturday nights, the series would air with a new episode weekly in prime time starting in March 2004, nearly a year after they cut us off, which did kill some of the anticipation. While it was hype for me, finally getting closure on the Toguro fight and getting to see the Chapter Black arc, I couldn't tell how well it was doing with general audiences. I would happily check it out every week I could, but I think the scheduling change hurt it ultimately since Toonami stopped running it before the series concluded. They didn't even finish the season. In the third season, known as the Chapter Black arc, they stopped showing it on Toonami during the main villain fight when it looked like the main character Yusuke was dead, even though the fight was still ongoing. They cut us off at episode 88 in January 2005, then it had reruns for a few months before they took it off the lineup completely in April. Once again, I have no idea why they did not just let the series play out, and for me, I went a long time without seeing the rest of the series until I was able to watch it online years later. However, it did finish on Cartoon Network. They decided to finish showing the rest of the episodes weekly at 5:30 a.m. on Saturday mornings with no advertising, so there was a way I could have finished it, but no one was telling us it was on. It felt like such a strange decision since Toonami was still going strong. This dropped show bothered me the most of any show that they dropped because I had so much time invested in it. Despite that, the anime got some redemption by being featured on the Best of Toonami block during the April Fool's 2012 lineup, so there's no grudge to be held. We got to see one more showing of Yu Yu Hakusho under Toonami branding with the fanfare it deserved. Number 6, The Big O. The Big O is one of the first series I think of when I hear someone say anime, and it's definitely because of the imprint it left on me from Toonami. It has so many cool aspects of anime, like the vintage art style, the big robot, the small robot, the giant monsters, and you gotta hand it to Toonami for knowing what the audience wanted to see, since apparently this series was not popular over in Japan when it premiered. It was supposed to be 2 seasons, but it didn't do well in Japan, so they just cut it to a single 13-episode season. Toonami producers saw something in it though, and took the risk to broadcast it. It was only 13 episodes long, so there wasn't much of a time commitment to showing it. It was almost the opposite reaction though, where they wished they had more episodes to show, since it was a hit with international audiences. They had to stretch those 13 episodes after it premiered in April 2001. They'd reran it multiple times and showed it on the midnight run, but we needed more. The best part of this story is where Cartoon Network wanted more episodes to a point where they actually collaborated with its Japanese production studio Sunrise to make the second season that never was, in part thanks to Big O's popularity on Toonami. The second season never made it to Toonami initially though. They aired it only on Adult Swim's anime block when it came to Cartoon Network. I'm not sure what the logic in that decision was, since season 2 of Big O didn't have anything that seemed too bad for Toonami, but I kinda get it. Big O was a more mature show, not because of anything graphic, but the plot lines were emotionally mature. Still, it was a success on Toonami with a younger demographic before, so there's no reason they couldn't show it on both blocks. The series deals with millionaire protagonist Roger Smith, who's a negotiator for Paradigm City. He can help work out the differences between any parties, but he's pretty untrusting of everyone, and the city itself has a dark history mystery that causes it to constantly be invaded by giant monsters of sorts. That's where Roger's other job comes into play. He defends the city against these monsters with his giant mech, the Big O, and then we get all the cool fights that they'd advertise. He's joined by his butler Norman, who remains calm but deals with heavy artillery, and the android Dorothy. She appears emotionless, but that's just because she's a robot. In reality, she wants to do more human things since she desires to act like a normal member of society. Her interest in being social clashes with Roger's disinterest in interacting with people at all, outside of what he has to do for his job, making them bounce off each other well. They're both cold individuals, but for different reasons, and want to go opposite directions with what they do in life.
Roger was all curmudgeon-y, and Dorothy's just like, I want to be a lady. And he's like, rah, rah, rah. And she's like, screw you, I'm gonna be a lady in high society.
I also love when Dorothy plays the piano. There's a beauty to it since she sees it as something human that she can do, and also comedy to it since it annoys Roger. And beyond Dorothy's emotional backstory, she's also mega strong and fast to contrast with her appearance, making for great shots and promo material. Not to mention their theme song just had this tone of epicness to it. Sing it, Judgment Meter.
Big O, big O, big O. I don't know the rest of it.
For years, Adult Swim would rotate Big O reruns in and out of the schedule, especially the second season since Cartoon Network owned those rights, but once Toonami was revived in 2012 as a Saturday night block on Adult Swim, those reruns could air on a block branded as Toonami, and the second season officially made its first Toonami appearance in July 2013 when that particular rerun cycle got to the second half of the series. There was no real fanfare when this happened. It was basically treated as the reruns making their rounds again since season 2 was a decade old at that point, and the only difference from past reruns was the commercial bumpers. But at the very least, we can say the entire series was shown on Toonami now. Number 5. Sailor Moon. Sailor Moon is a very important piece of Toonami history. Looking at early Toonami, it was mostly 80 shows. However, in a deal with Turner, they somehow got the first 2 seasons of the Sailor Moon dub, and being an anime with action, it fit right with the Toonami theming. This was the first anime fully made in the 90s that was shown on Toonami, and it was pretty recent at the time of its Toonami premiere. I don't think Sailor Moon needs an introduction, but if you want one, a teenage girl finds out that she was the Moon Princess in a past life, and she can transform into that persona for special powers to fight the dark forces related to that past life. She meets other girls along the way who were also reincarnated versions of the Guardians from that kingdom, and now we have a whole team together. The anime didn't fare too well in US syndication on other networks prior to Toonami. I feel the time slots were all over the place, so it had a hard time reaching an audience, though some people may blame the dub. It was dubbed in English by Deke with the help of other collaborators, and they heavily edited the content and music. The scripts were inaccurate, but the dubbing was funny, leading to ironic enjoyment from how weird some of the lines and voices are. It's a guilty pleasure dub. When Sailor Moon was brought to Toonami in June 1998, they started with all the episodes that ran in syndication, but apparently the last 17 from season 2 were never dubbed before Toonami, so they could call them the lost episodes for advertising when they got dubbed after fan support. I'm not sure if they were planning just to air those 2 seasons and move on, but the success of these 2 seasons paved the way for something great. First off, I credit the advertising for its Toonami success. They just went with a universal appeal campaign. They highlighted the cool moments cause they were cool. The Deke dub went a more kid-friendly route in advertising, so Toonami tried to counteract that with Moltar or Peter Cullen telling us how the Sailor Scouts kick butt. And second, many fans attribute Sailor Moon's Toonami success as to why Toonami took more risks to get rights to air other more recent anime in the future. Who knows, maybe they wouldn't have pursued getting Dragon Ball Z if Sailor Moon flopped. With no other episodes dubbed after the second season though, it seemed like Sailor Moon was just going to end with the lost episodes and ride off into the sunset. But with the help of fan support and the popularity on Toonami, and perhaps other factors I don't know about, Sailor Moon experienced a renaissance of sorts and had its 3rd and 4th seasons dubbed dubbed in 2000, making its way back to the lineup. With Deke no longer leading the charge, the company Cloverway was involved with the dub and went with more accurate translations, music from the Japanese version, and cut out all the educational stuff that Deke added. It's jarring seeing how much better certain aspects of these newly dubbed seasons were compared to the older seasons. It's also jarring that most of the voice actors changed. Jupiter retained hers, and I like some of the new voices, but other voices did not fit. This dub also had the infamous censorship of calling Sailor Uranus and Neptune cousins to cover up that they were lesbians, yet they didn't change up much about how they interacted, so it just made it weirder. Anyway, the series continued to have a nice run into 2001, where even when it ran out of new episodes, they just went with reruns. I specifically remember it being featured on Toonami's morning block, Rising Sun, when that was a thing. Is there something ironic about me associating Sailor Moon with the morning block? However, 2001 was the end of the road for Sailor Moon on Toonami and US TV stations in general. The broadcast rights ran out in 2003, and I don't think Cartoon Network ever pursued them again, even with the anime being redubbed in 2013 and getting spin-offs. Today, Sailor Moon is noticeably absent when they want to show off legacy anime in modern Toonami content. Understandably, it's because of broadcast rights reasons, but I want the world to remember how big a deal it was when Sailor Moon was on Toonami. Number 4, the original Tenchi Muyo, Tenchi Universe, and Tenchi in Tokyo. On my forgotten Toonami list, I gave a little rundown of the history of the Tenchi series with Toonami, since I wanted to talk about its spin-off GXP that was on that list. But now that we're talking about the icons of Toonami, it was a no-brainer to include the 90s Tenchi series. So let's dive deeper into how big these series were for the block. What made Tenchi so special is how different it was from the other anime on Toonami at the time, when it premiered in 2000. Usually, we got something that was already mainstream in the West, such as the 80s anime like Robotech and Ronin Warriors, or new anime that were smash hits in Japan, so their popularity was predicted, like Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z. But in July 2000, after all these big-name anime, Tenchi sat right down in the 6 p.m. time slot and basically never left on the weekdays. While it still had the action of the other series, there was a slice-of-life aspect to it. Well, as slice of life as these characters could get, but I liked the calmness of when the characters could just breathe and talk to each other, away from all the big stakes. You didn't see too much of that on Toonami programming at the time. This started with Tenchi Muyo, which was an OVA in Japan. OVA is a series that's initially released on video rather than a TV network, and since the episodes didn't have to comply with normal half-hour time slots as an OVA, they usually had to edit down episodes for a 30-minute airing, or just aired the full thing on Toonami and then showed something short afterwards. It was about a teenager named Tenchi who releases a space pirate made by a space scientist on pursuit by a space cop, and he finds out that he's related to space princesses who are looking for their long-lost half-brother, which turns out to be Tenchi's grandfather. Then the villain wants certain relics of theirs, so it's up to Tenchi to use the powers in his bloodline to stop him, at least in the first OVA. Also, it was a harem anime, so all the ladies that were mentioned live in his house now and are in love with him. There are 4 Tenchi Muyo OVAs overall, and they showed us the first 2 on Toonami, but each OVA concludes a story, so it's not like they were cutting us off. Instead, they showed us the next Tenchi series after those 2 OVAs, Tenchi Universe, which was a loose retelling of the Tenchi Muyo story over 26 episodes. This was the TV series for Tenchi in Japan. Certain elements were changed from Muyo, but the vibe was still the same. They also added a second space cop and a space pirate rival for Ryoko. Once Universe was done on Toonami, they gave us our last Tenchi series on weekdays, Tenchi in Tokyo, which I did not realize how different it was from the other series when I was younger. I was just happy to see more Tenchi adventures, but they changed key plot points, like Tenchi is no longer related to the space princesses, the characters get flanderized where they only retain their most bombastic characteristics, and the plot was just kinda boring. Still, the animation was nice, so I liked looking at it regardless, though they never seemed to explain that these were all different continuities when showing them back to back on Toonami, like they just showed them as if they were different seasons or something, so I was somewhat confused when we got an origin story again watching Muyo then Universe, but the pure unadulterated 90s anime style of the series made me forgive any confusion. It's hard to explain, but Tenchi felt like the most 90s anime they showed at the time based on art style, so I was like, whoa, I love this style. I want to see more of it. The soundtrack was also great. I still have the ending English theme for Muyo, Talent for Love, on my sleeping playlist. The bundle of Tenchi anime continued to air for about 2 years on and off, demonstrating how the series was a success with the demographic since they wanted to keep watching it, even showing it on some of the spin-off Toonami blocks. I caught it first on one of these rerun cycles, so it was smart of them to just keep the endless Tenchi going, otherwise I would have never seen the series. That being said, there's only so much you can do with about 40 episodes, so they eventually replaced it on the block, but it made its mark. It even got to be on the Best of Toonami April Fool's block in 2012 when they showed an episode from the third Muyo OVA. But then the Adult Swim Toonami block tried to show its spin-off Tenchi Muyo GXP in 2013, and you all know how that went if you watched my Forgotten Toonami video. Those ratings are probably why Cartoon Network hasn't paid for the licenses to show the later Tenchi anime. Number 3. Outlaw Star. Outlaw Star is one of those anime that makes me say, wow, what a cool show. It's got your futuristic space western feel where the main characters, Jean and Jim, take on various space odd jobs to make ends meet. Sometimes it's just transporting someone or something, other times it's bounty hunting. But as expected, various sci-fi crap gets in the way, like other bounty hunters or cacti. They also meet a lot of great characters along the way, like an assassin, an android, and Aisha Clan, the strongest cat girl in the galaxy, who's just terrific whenever she's involved in the plot. I'm a little surprised they showed this on Toonami before it was on Adult Swim, since there was a lot to censor, like violence, language, and nudity. And on that last point, Melfina, the android, pilots the ship naked while in its apparatus, which is done artistically since she's a robot, but they had to spend money on a lot of digital paint to put clothes on her in all scenes like that.
I was obsessed with Melfina for a good amount of time. It was the theme song, it was her singing, her really long voluminous hair. Yeah, she just captivated me. I have a type, it seems.
The series ran its course from January to March 2001 and then got reruns after that on and off for about a year. While consistent reruns generally means a show's popular, Outlaw Star got proof of that. When Toonami had a power to the people vote for viewers to determine which of their previously broadcast shows gets to return to the lineup in July 2001, it was between Outlaw Star, Reboot, Superman, and Batman. And I have no idea how good of a method they had to prevent people from voting multiple times, but regardless, the Outlaw Star fans were the loudest. It was also generally on the midnight run when it was on during the normal weekday lineup, so the show had some nice airtime. Once Adult Swim implemented their own Saturday night anime action lineup, Outlaw Star was taken off Toonami and aired on that until the broadcasting rights ran out at the end of 2002. Since it was on Adult Swim and Toonami around the same time, I can't remember if some of the things that were not censored were also on Toonami or just Adult Swim, but the show really pushed the weekday Cartoon Network rating with or without it. Outlaw Star's Toonami legacy didn't end there, though. After the block ended, during the famous 2012 April Fool's lineup when Adult Swim surprised viewers with a faux Toonami lineup on April Fool's Day as if the block never left, Outlaw Star was one of the classics featured on that block. Then when Toonami was revived as a Saturday night block on Adult Swim, Outlaw Star got a couple of rerun cycles in 2017 and 18, this time without the censorship needed. The fact that it could come back over 15 years later and still get good ratings for reruns shows that fan vote still holds water. Number 2, all the Gundam series, mostly Mobile Suit Gundam Wing, but we'll go over all the relevant ones here. Gundam is a series that I felt like was always on Toonami. With each Gundam series basically being its own thing, you gotta be more specific than just saying Gundam ran on Toonami. You have to look at the individual series and their connection with the block, since the reactions varied. Some ran their course and were heavily featured on the block, while others were brushed off to the side quickly and only survived on name recognition. The different Gundam series always involved giant mech suit robot fights in space colonies in the future, but the plot lines vary with deep interpersonal stories between the human members of the cast. Usually there's a war going on, maybe a tournament, perhaps a space dictator manipulating the warriors who use the Gundams. There's a lot of opposition of corrupt authority in these series. It's hard to give a blanket statement for every Gundam plot once you look past the giant robots. The first Gundam series Toonami broadcast was Mobile Suit Gundam Wing in March 2000. This was not the first Gundam series by a long shot, but it was popular in Japan, and Toonami helped make make it a staple of the lineup. The ads with Peter Cullen telling us that this was a new chapter in one of the greatest anime sagas of all time can't help but hype you up for this series. Plus, the no-nonsense nature of the villains who kill anyone who opposes them set the stakes. And hey, cool robot fights too. The series reran multiple times and had a few stints on the weekday lineup. The episodes had to be edited for violence, but it also aired on the midnight run, where the episodes were uncensored. With the series being a hit, Toonami had a whole franchise of Gundam series, so they thought, why not show even more? They logically went for the original Mobile Suit Gundam next in July 2001. This was the first Gundam series ever, initially premiering in 1979, so it established the plot and base elements of all the series, though this series didn't do as well on Toonami, being pulled on September 12, 2001, with only 4 episodes left in its run. However, fan support was still strong, as later that year, Toonami had a fan vote on the best villains from any show that they ever broadcast, for a New Year's Eve block called New Year's Evil. Dragon Ball Z got the top 3 spots with Majin Buu, Cell, and Raditz, and put that in a time capsule when those were the top 3 Dragon Ball villains in the US. After that were the Tenchi and Gundam Wing villains, and then we had Mobile Suit Gundam in the 5th spot with their villain Char, and Toonami did something special for that spot. Toonami actually aired the last episode of Mobile Suit Gundam here, making this late night marathon a surprise premiere for the end of the series that kids might have wanted to see, so it shows that this series had enough popularity, or it got enough votes since it was still recent in our minds at the time. In November 2001, Gundam 0080 ran on the midnight run only. It was a 6-episode OVA, so its run was short by nature, but it got various late-night reruns over the years. I also forgot to mention that July 2001 saw Mobile Suit Gundam the 8th MS Team, another Gundam OVA. Similar situation to 80, where it was on the midnight run when it premiered, but they tried it out on the weekday block too. This filled the gap when original Mobile Suit Gundam was taken off the block in late 2001. Gundam took a break on Toonami for about half of 2002, but by August it returned with G Gundam, probably my favorite of the franchise because it's the martial arts tournament arc of Gundams, where instead of traditional pilots, the suits tracked the motions of the person inside for unique fighting styles. It's not all direct combat though. The weapons and powers are fantastic. I usually default to talking about the Lumberjack or Rose Laser Gundams, but I almost forgot that there was a Windmill Gundam in this series. Anyway, G Gundam was a hit, and it even got a daily hour block in October 2002, and then it got reruns into 2003. After that, we got SD Gundam in September 2003, which was the chibi cute Gundam. This one was weird for how much of a tonal shift it was from the other Gundam series, but it apparently had somewhat positive Toonami ratings, so good for it. They only aired SD's first season though, possibly because it was unpopular in Japan and they wanted it to rest on its laurels for Toonami. Once Toonami moved to Saturdays only, it was rough for Gundam. The first year of the Saturday only block, 2004, Gundam Seed ran, which was about a year old at that point, the newest Gundam series they had ever aired. It didn't particularly do well. It got 26 of its 50 episodes aired on a weekly basis on Toonami, and then it got the Cyborg 009 treatment and was shown off Toonami at 1 a.m. after the Fridays block until the series was finished. And from then on, no more Gundam before Toonami's cancellation in 2008, which was a major disappointment to see a series that helped build up the block just fade into the ether of the network. However, with Rebirth comes a new chance. When Toonami was revived as an Adult Swim block in 2012, plenty of classic franchises made their returns, either with reruns or later series in their franchises, Gundam included. 3 notable Gundam series were shown over the years, being Unicorn, Iron-Blooded Orphans, and Origin. The time slots varied, but they were usually given a spot in the first half of the night on their initial runs. Ratings were average, but it was great to see Toonami consistently show respect to one of the franchises that put them on the map, and they know it. When it was Gundam Wing's 25th anniversary, they gave it a wonderful extended bumper celebrating its legacy. It might even bring a tear to your eye. Very cool, Toonami. It's pretty obvious what number 1 is going to be, but its impact on Toonami's schedule and the love Toonami gave it made it impossible to put it anywhere else except number 1, Dragon Ball Z and the other Dragon Ball series. Dragon Ball Z is another series that needs no introduction. Even if you don't know the plot, you at least know it as the series with those guys who whose hair turns yellow and they fight with big beams and explosions. But it wasn't always like that, and without Toonami, US TV may have never gotten to that part of the series. Before Toonami, Dragon Ball was kind of a flop in terms of mainstream attention in the US. Despite being immensely popular in Japan and other countries, its 2 stints on US TV before Toonami resulted in cancellation where their dubs didn't even finish. The first try in syndication was with a lost dub in the late 80s and another dub from the early mid-90s of the original Dragon Ball No Z. For those who don't know, Dragon Ball as a manga is just Dragon Ball the whole way through, from Pilaf to Buu. But when the anime was produced, they split the way the series was packaged due to the tonal shift in the story. The Dragon Ball anime covers around the first half of the series and focuses more on adventure and fantasy along with frequent martial arts tournaments, bookended by Goku finally getting first place at a tournament. In the manga, a 5-year time skip occurs in the next chapter after the victory, but the anime producers just started a new anime for this half of the series, with a Z at the end because it sounded cooler, and this was probably the best way to go about it if they had to split the anime in half. I would have preferred it stayed as one, but this is the part of the story that has a pretty big tonal shift, with Goku learning he's an alien from another planet, Goku's son becoming a main character and setting him up to eventually take over the protagonist role, which more went back to Goku at the end, and there was a bigger sci-fi feel rather than fantasy. Anyway, a dub of Dragon Ball hit syndication, but it didn't find an audience in the early 90s. It's funny watching the ad for the syndicated run, and they only had the first few episodes to use for footage for the commercial, but there is something cozy about watching the initial hunt for the Dragon Ball arc early in the morning when this would have been broadcast. And that's the only part of the series you would get, since the first 13 episodes were dubbed, and that's it. This was actually licensed by Funimation, but dubbed in Canada, not by Ocean Productions. Funimation tried this years later with Z in 1996, in collaboration with Ocean Group and Saban, and this is the dub people remember. It was tried out on some action cartoon blocks in syndication, but either the advertising was poor or no one cared yet. Since ratings were so mediocre, they stopped producing the dub in the middle of an arc when Goku just landed on Namek during the Ginyu Force fights. What a cliffhanger! I'm glad I didn't get invested in the series until they dubbed past that. But with anime doing well on Toonami, they decided to get the rights to air that unfinished DBZ dub, and y'all know what happens next. Everyone loved it. It never left the weekday block once it premiered, it was on every Toonami spin-off block they had, and they made sure the reruns of new episodes and even old episodes were in rotation. They only had the first 60 or so episodes dubbed, so they just had to cycle through those episodes for a while, but with the immense popularity of those episodes, the dub was revived. The dub from 1996 hit Toonami in September 1998. However, with Funimation no longer having the partnership with Saban and Ocean Group all those years later, they just had to record the rest of the series in-house for the dub, which was rough at first. The voice actors tried to imitate the old voice actors, and the line reads could be stiff at times. But as time went on, the dub got sharper with the new voice actors, and the voice actors got to do their own takes on the characters rather than just trying to mimic the older voices. Whenever these voice actors dub any Dragon Ball stuff after this dub, it's way more accurate and polished. The old dub is just something to be viewed as a product of its time and circumstances. After the Cell Saga concluded on Toonami with much success, they had the great idea, hey, why don't we just air the first half of the series? And thus, Dragon Ball finally got a full dub and the red carpet treatment with plenty of time slots and advertising. It started in August 2001, and this is where I finally tuned in. I actually wasn't a Dragon Ball Z fan through the Cell arc during the Toonami run. Obviously, you can tell that's changed if you look at my channel, but every time I caught an episode during the Cell arc or earlier, it was hard to get into Dragon Ball Z since they were always in the middle of a plot line, and I could tell I was missing key information. However, when I saw the ad for Dragon Ball, something about the art style and how fun the characters looked got me interested. At the time, I didn't realize that this was the first half of Z, and I just assumed it was like Tenchi or Gundam, where it was an alternate timeline story. I loved the whimsy and adventure, the characters were pure fun, and I really didn't know what was coming around every every corner not watching Z, a transforming pig, a desert bandit, a rabbit who turns people into carrots, giant pinball, and that's all just the first arc. And I was legitimately surprised by both of the Uzaru giant monkey transformations without the Z knowledge, along with giving me a good surprise when Vegeta did it when I watched Z for the first time. Plus, this series gave me my love for organized tournament arcs in anime. You would think this would get me to watch the series in proper order since I started with Dragon Ball rather than Z, but since I was now a Dragon Ball fan and my only way to access the series was TV at the time, I just decided to watch Z alongside Dragon Ball, right when they were entering the Buu arc on Toonami, so I was all out of whack when it came to watching the series in the proper order. Anyway, Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z had ample airtime throughout the weekdays. When Toonami was moving to Saturday nights, they turned the weekday block into a tribute to the Dragon Ball franchise for the last few weeks of its existence, only airing Dragon Ball and Z as a celebration of the weekday block before it got canned. Each Chronicles block ended with an episode of Dragon Ball GT, which was premiering on a weekly basis after they ran out of Dragon Ball and DBZ episodes starting in November 2003, but it couldn't finish its run on weekdays, so it was moved to the Saturday lineup. Since Dragon Ball GT had to continue its run on Saturdays, I feel it hurt its attention no longer being on weekdays with such a drastic scheduling change, but it did get to finish its run on Toonami. Dragon Ball GT tends to get mixed reviews in general, so I'm not sure if the airtime or just the popularity of the show explains why it wasn't as much of a powerhouse on Toonami. They also skipped the entire first arc of GT in this airing of the dub and replaced it with a recap episode. They later aired the first arc dubbed, but outside of Toonami. Once GT finished its run, that was all for Dragon Ball. We still saw the occasional movie or episode rerun both on and off Toonami, but with there being no new animated Dragon Ball content overall, Toonami did all they could with the series, but it had a hell of a run. That being said, they're not done yet. With the Toonami revival in 2012, Dragon Ball went a couple of years with no attention from the block, but in 2014, they had the great idea to air Dragon Ball Z Kai, the remastered, redubbed version of the series with a lot of the filler cut out. This headlined the night for a while with success. With the modern Toonami demographic generally being nostalgic young adults, this ended up being a great excuse for people to rewatch the series who hadn't seen it since the original Toonami run. After it finished in 2018, they tried rerunning the series from the beginning, but it was off the lineup in a few months, so I think that magic was lost, but its initial return to Toonami was something special. In the middle of this, the newest Dragon Ball series, Dragon Ball Super, had its dub premiere on Toonami in 2017, so for the first time in almost 15 years, Dragon Ball was all new on Toonami. Regardless of your opinion of Super, this got people watching Toonami again, which is indicative of the connection this franchise has with the block. So you know it, you love it, or maybe you don't, but you can't deny that Dragon Ball Z and company are the most iconic Toonami anime. Now, what did you think? What are some of your favorite anime from Toonami that felt like they got proper recognition and made you an anime fan today? And which anime got a lot of attention from Toonami, but not from us? Let us know in the comments. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and we will see you in the next video.